Hey, what's up, friends? Welcome to the Deconstruction Zone. It looks a little different this week than it usually does. It's not Emily and me, or even Dustin and me, but we're going back to Zoom and we're having a kind of interview conversation. And I'm excited about this one. So we have Marla Taviano. You're joining us, and I don't want to spoil your introduction. So I thought what would be the best thing for us to do is if you just want to tell us kind of who you are, um, and maybe why you're intrigued and interested in the deconstruction conversation, and maybe some of the stuff, because we'll get to this later, but also some of the stuff you're contributing to the overall deconstruction conversation, just so people get an idea of kind of who you are and why you're here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Danny. I grew up, I've been a Christian for as long as I could remember. And one of the kinds of Christians that's super zealous about Jesus and God
Okay.
and making sure that everyone can get saved and go to heaven forever with me. And I grew up in a very small town, very white town. I never would have called my Christianity white conservative evangelical Christianity. To me, it
Okay.
was just
Yeah.
Christianity.
Yeah.
I didn't know the labels, didn't know how sheltered I was. I went to a public school, but a lot of my teachers were Christians. Some of them went to my church. And I went on to go to a Christian college, and then I did my student teaching in Japan. I went to a Christian church camp, met my future husband, we got married. We had 3 daughters. This is in 2000, 2002, and 2006. Fast forward through a bunch of stuff. He had a heart attack at the age of 34 and almost died. Right after that, we took
Okay.
a family trip to Cambodia for 5 weeks, came back in January 2012 and planned to move to Cambodia to be missionaries. And then he ended up in the ER with what we thought was another heart attack. It was panic attacks. And that led to 3 years of anxiety and panic attacks, losing our house and his job and all of that. In 2014, we moved into an apartment complex. It was all we could afford at the time, and it was primarily Somali refugees in Columbus, Ohio. And we made a bunch of really amazing friends from Eritrea and Somalia, Nepal, and Mexico. And then in January of 2015, we did move to Cambodia, where we lived until March 2020. And we moved back on literally the last plane out of our city after a bunch of cancellations. Had to leave our oldest and her Cambodian fiance in the country because his visa interview was canceled because the embassy was closed. We get back, we moved to South Carolina. I'm originally from Ohio, and we didn't want to go back to the cold. And there was a lot of some tricky situations up in Ohio, people who had disowned me for being a heretic, because that also happened while I was there in
Yeah.
Cambodia. I started deconstructing my faith and coming up with some new ideas. In September of 2020, so just a few months after we got back, my husband left unexpectedly, said he wanted a divorce. And in January of 2021, I found out that he had been cheating on me for 4 of the 5 years that we lived in Cambodia. So right now, I am a single mom of four older kids who all live with me. My
Okay.
son-in-law is 25. My daughters are 22, 20, and 17. And we have survived all of the things that we have been through. And I wouldn't say it's been easy. I would say that I am in a really good place as far as I know who I am and who I want to be, and I have a lot of cool things going on. So I read and write for a living. Most of the reading and writing I do is just a labor of love. I don't get paid for it. And then I've got my
Okay.
book, which I get paid a little bit for, and then I write for other people as my day job.
Okay.
But I started decon- uh, deconstruction. I don't know when I first heard the word. I'm sure I started doing it way before I heard about it, around 2008, 9, 10. And I was talking to you before we started about how it really was just a slippery slope from
Yeah.
the first thing that kind of happened. I think was that I read a book called The Hole in Our Gospel, and
Okay.
the author is saying that if your gospel isn't good news for AIDS orphans in Uganda, then how is it really good news? And if you're going
Yeah.
there and just telling them Jesus died for your sins, you get to go to heaven, but they're suffering and dying here on earth, then something's missing from your gospel. And that kind of threw me for a loop. And from there, we helped plant a multi ethnic church in our city. I woke up to racism and white supremacy. Um, and then, yeah, the dominoes just all fell. So, where am I now? Where have I landed? I have not landed anywhere, and I actually wrote a poem about that in my first book. And I say first book, as in when I started over in 2021. I was a Christian author with traditionally published books in
Okay.
2006, 7, 8, and 9. Books like From Blushing Bride to Wedded Wife, they were all very cliche marriage, sex, and motherhood
Okay.
books.
You wrote those books. That's like a book you
I
wrote.
I wrote those books
Okay.
and they were published and they were out in the world and I still have them now and they make me want to vomit. But I'm working on going back through them right now to see kind of what went wrong. No, to see I am diving back into my past just to understand myself more. It's helping me
Yeah.
understand others who are still where I was. And it's not that I'm trying to get people to where I am. I just want people to be honest. I want people to know the truth of history, the truth of Christianity, the truth of the Bible not being something that we take literally, like I thought for so long. And my main thing is, I don't care what you believe as long as
Okay.
your beliefs are not harming other people. And that's that's just kind of my guideline. Like, do your beliefs harm people? Well, then I think you shouldn't have them.
Yeah.
Do they not harm people? Well, then go for it. And an example I give is heaven and hell. I do not believe in eternal conscious torment like I used to believe.
Yeah.
So I don't believe there's a fiery hell that people go to if they don't say the right words in a prayer.
Hmm.
What do I believe about heaven? That I don't know. So I'm not here to take away anybody's comforting beliefs about heaven because
Yeah.
I too would like a heaven for my loved ones to go to and
Yeah.
me to go to after this life is over. But hell, I don't see any reason why hell is a comforting belief for people. If you are comforted by the fact that people who believe differently than you are going to spend eternity in hell, then I have a problem with that. And especially if you're treating people who are different than you as if they deserve that kind of hell.
Yeah.
That's what I would call a harmful belief. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
There's a
me.
lot.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. There's a lot of like. That's such an interesting thought. Like thing to think about. Like, so I'm a United Methodist pastor, and so I don't know how well you
Okay.
know the Methodist world, but one of like our core tenets, and we're as a church right now, we're like in the midst of dividing over some theological issues, primarily around human sexuality. But
Yeah. Yeah.
a common a common refrain, even in the most conservative and the most progressive sides, is to kind of do no harm, do good, and like stay in love
Mm,
with God. And I hear a
mhm.
little bit of that in what you're talking about, right? It's
Yeah.
like my faith is about trying to do the most good I can. Even though I don't know that you're like would identify, as you said, like with the same Christian God you always do. Like there's some like you want to be doing some level of greater good, and in all of
Yeah.
that to not harm those around you, which I think is a really like interesting, but not even like interesting in a weird way, like an interestingly good like lens for us to put on, like whether we're Christian, atheist, agnostic, Muslim, whatever, like to
Yeah.
say our beliefs at the core, like if they're harming people, there might be something inherently wrong with them. And I think that points back to like some of the stuff and how we digest scripture and whatnot. But I wonder, so you talked about like you've been on this journey. Do you have like a singular moment? Like, because Emily and I talk a lot about the Jenga tower, right? So like we're pulling blocks
Mm,
away, and
mhm.
sometimes you don't even realize you pull them away, and then all of a sudden the tower is in shambles in front of you, right? Um, so do you have like a big catalytic or singular moment where like, oh, you're like, oh shit, like the tower's gone? Or was it just kind of like you all of a sudden you looked and there was no more tower? Like, what was that journey like from you from day one of realizing you're kind of pulling some pieces out to where
Yeah.
you're at now?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a singular moment, but there definitely were singular moments, like
Okay.
different things that happened. I usually trace it back to Rachel Held Evans. I credit her with
Okay.
literally changing my life. And when her book came out, it's called Faith Unraveled now, but it was called Evolving in Monkeytown. And I can't remember how I first heard about her on the internet, but someone I used to blog, I did all this stuff. I'm writing all this
Yeah.
crap from a conservative Christian point of view, trying to be funny. It was whatever. But I found out about her book and I bought it and I started reading it and I shut it and put it off to the side. And the read I couldn't handle it. The cognitive dissonance was just too jarring for me. And what it was that she and I were so much alike. Like we
Mm.
were these zealous Christian girls at a public school trying to witness to our classmates. I was co-valedictorian. The speech I wrote was a proselytizing sermon that I got up
Okay.
in front of everybody and said. She was doing the same thing. So I am seeing that she and I are identical. She is just as on fire as I am. And now she is asking these questions that are terrifying me because she's not just some random person from the outside coming and pushing buttons and playing devil's advocate. She's me and she's asking these questions. And I couldn't do it. And I don't know how long it was the time that passed between when I closed that book and when I opened it back up again, but it changed everything because she was asking all of these questions like, so when during the Holocaust, when these Jewish people were put in these ovens and killed, were they waking up in hell? So is this how this was happening? Like they and she would just go on and on and on to all these, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like I can't. And from there, I just started reading other authors, and it started out there were a lot of white authors. I was reading Pete Enns and Rob Bell and Sue Monk Kidd. Rob Bell is another one. His book Love Wins, I bought that maybe in
Yeah.
2011, 2012. Opened it up, thought, crap, I can't read this either. I shut it, and I didn't open that one again for a few years after that. But so that was one moment. My white supremacy racism moment was when Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012, and we had already been at this church for a while that was started by a black pastor. It was intentionally multi-ethnic. I was waking up to a lot of things, but it had kind of been smooth sailing until Trayvon was killed, and one of my new friends said, "Why aren't my white friends talking about this?" I didn't know
Sure.
what she meant. I Googled it, and then I started just learning and unlearning as much as I could about US history, police brutality, mass incarceration, all of these issues that I had been oblivious to because
Mm.
I didn't need to know. As far as becoming LGBTQ plus affirming, that singular moment for me was a blog series by a man named BT Harmon. At the time, he was going by the name Brett Trapp. It was called Blue Babies Pink, and he grew up in I want to say, a Southern Baptist home, son of a preacher, and prayed every day over and over and over again for his whole entire life that God would take the gay away because he
Mm.
knew that it was a sin. And that he wasn't the first person whose story I read so completely, but that put me over the top because I thought there's no way that
Yeah.
you can be so faithful and be in church and read the Bible and pray every single day for 30 years and God doesn't take it away, and I'm supposed to believe that you're sinning, you're evil, you're
Yeah.
wrong. And I thought, no, I can't do that. So a lot of different moments, but it really was. There's a lot of truth to all the analogies about the unraveling of the sweater, the slippery slope, the dominoes.
Yeah.
Um, because you just naturally want to know if one thing I believe my whole life turned out to be really, really wrong, what about this other thing? What about this other thing? What about this other thing?
Yeah.
And I'm still kind of on that journey of discovering those things, but I don't actually care right now. I don't actually
Sure.
care what the Bible says about this or that. Um, I still think the Bible's got a lot of good stuff in it. I still learn a
Sure.
lot from that. I'm reading it. I'm not reading the Bible necessarily, but reading books by Black womanist scholars and other people who love the Bible, but they're approaching it from a very different um,
Yeah.
point of view. than I did growing up, which was largely dead white men, I think, is where
Yeah,
I
right. I
got
mean,
most of
they
my
held
theology.
they held the pen for a long time,
And
and
I
which has been so wonderful to like see that the
yeah.
eclecticness of voices like Black liberation theology and
Uh-huh.
feminist theology and like so many other voices um, are now like not like a novelty, but like are actually like strong voices in the space, which are helping rattle in some ways like because like for you and me, I mean we have different experiences. I'm a straight white guy, you're a white
Mhm.
woman, right? Like so we have
Mhm.
like different experiences in that regard, but like white Christian general evangelicalism, like we've all
Yeah.
kind of been consuming the same content. And I
Yeah.
remember the first time I read James Cone, I was like, oh, like other people like read the Exodus story far different than I do, right? And it was
Yeah.
like it was an
Yeah.
eye opening experience,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um, which I think is cool for like our audience and probably your audience, um, like as they consume it, like if the very least being like, hey, there's other like we can faithfully dive into scripture, but like my perspective is not the only faithful way to do that, right? Which I think is really important for us to understand. I kind of cut you off for a second. Were you going to continue your thought? I want to let you finish what you
I
had to say real quick.
I was just gonna comment on something you said earlier about being a United Methodist
Oh yeah,
preacher. So fun story for me personally. I have a great uncle. So my mom's uncle, Grayson, who's 86 years old, he was a United Methodist minister for years and years. He's since
okay,
retired. His son is now a United Methodist minister. And when I was growing up, my experience of Uncle Grayson was that he was kind of the black sheep of the family. I
yeah,
remember my parents saying, well, Uncle Grayson's not really saved. He marched in a pride parade, like these different things. So in my mind, that's what I thought. Yeah, he's a nice guy, a little bit eccentric, but we need to pray for his soul because
sure,
he's not on the right track here. He does not believe like we believe. Well, fast forward to 2015 when I was living in Cambodia and I had started putting things on Facebook, on
yeah,
Instagram, like things that I was changing my mind and heart about. And some people were all in an uproar about it. One of my sisters ended up disowning me over this, like just from
okay,
stuff I put on the internet. But my Uncle Grayson's daughter, so my second cousin, first cousin once removed or whatever she is to me, she reached out and said, based on some of the things you've been putting on the internet, I wondered if you would be interested in helping my dad edit and write his book. And it's called The Clergy Dance, and it's about his life as a United Methodist minister.
sure,
And at first I was like, oh, I don't want my family to find out that, that I'm helping Uncle Grayson. But that turned out to be this really, really, really cool experience because I am now seeing it from the other side. And I'm
yeah,
writing about him being accepting of this gay man in his church and helping his black friends get housing when they were denied and all of these the human rights, civil rights things that he was doing that whole entire time that I was sitting back thinking, oh, well, you're not a Christian. And then he went on to buy 10 copies of my first book. He bought 5 copies of my second book. He's given them out to people. And most of the people in my family aren't reading my books, would never share my books, are very unhappy with where I've turned out. And there's Uncle Grayson. So that
uh,
was
uh,
just that's a pretty special thing to me that he's a part of my life
yeah,
and my story and has forgiven me for
yeah.
for all the things that I used to believe about him.
Uncle Grayson for the win. You know,
Yeah.
United Methodists, were not all bad. So,
Yeah.
I maybe empathize with him in that way that there's because I'm like one of the things I'm like a inclusive pastor of the LGBTQ community. I want to fight the best I can to combat racial injustice, though I know there's exponentially more that I could do.
Yeah.
And there's certain things in that regard that like some of my more evangelical friends or fundamentalist friends would be like, well, you're just kind of like you're choosing social justice over the real gospel. And I was like, and it's like it seems to me because I have a very high view and value of scripture. Like I'm still very
Yeah.
much team Jesus and team Christian, right? And so and I'm
Mhm.
like, I can't see any other way to read the scripture than to be one that's like deeply devoted to what Jesus would have called the greatest commandment, right? To love God and love
Yeah.
neighbor and like
Mhm.
seek justice. So um so when I dove into your book, most recent one, Jaded, it reads to me like the Psalms. And one of the things I say a lot is
Ooh.
like I think that this like, I think it's really interesting when the New Testament was done, where, like, no one else can write anything. So Rob Bell writes a book, or Francis Chan, or whoever. I'm like, that's the letter to the church in America. Like, I view them like that. Like, I read
Mhm.
Christian literature as like letters to the modern day church. And
Yeah.
and I thought your book, as I was like going through some of the stuff, I was like, not only was it written very in pithy, poetic ways, which I thought was wonderful, just as someone consuming content, but I was like, this reads to me like a psalm type kind of story or device. And so I guess I would just wonder, like, you had an option to write whatever you wanted. You could have wrote a narrative. You could have dove into history and theology. Why choose the poetic direction and kind of the way you chose to tell the story you were trying to tell in
Okay, first of all, that's my new favorite compliment, that it reads to you like
Jaded?
the Psalms. I love that. I've not
Yeah.
heard that one yet. So, um, well, I've been writing forever. So I started reading when I was 4, and I've not stopped since. I have poems actually from when I was in 1st grade that I have my actual
Okay.
handwriting of these poems. And I tell people I wrote poems when I was 6, 7, and 8, and then I didn't write a poem again until I was 45. So in between there, I have book after book after book after book of prose. I have 10 years, 15 years of blogging, all prose. No poetry to be found. And so when I wrote those 4 books that were traditionally published about conservative stuff, and then I did kind of a long stretch of self-published ebooks, all about my life, things that I was going through. When I decided a few years ago that the next like logical thing to write about is this deconstruction that I'm going through. And I had a big, huge document. I was writing all this stuff down. It was
Okay.
long. It was definitely narrative, definitely prose. But my mind kept changing, things kept changing, and
Okay.
I
Yeah.
thought, how do you tell this whole story without putting people to sleep, boring people, or I'm over this part now, and how do I say this? I couldn't figure it out, and that was new for me. I think maybe being more certain in the past was helpful because I knew what I believed and I could put it in a book. And
Sure.
now that everything's changing, I couldn't keep up with it. And so when we moved back to the States in 2020, and my husband had a job for the first time, and I thought, okay, here now pressure is off of me to earn some money. I'm going to work on this book. Well, then he left. And so all of these things conspired. I had less time. People have shorter attention spans. I had
Sure.
a shorter attention span. And I was realizing that sometimes the things that pack the most punch were something that I came up with to put on Twitter or to put on Facebook that were
Yeah.
really short, really sweet. And in my work with reading and reviewing books by Black, Indigenous authors of color on my White Girl Learning Instagram account, I had started reading a lot of poetry. April is National Poetry Month. And so every April, I would read all poetry. And some of the poetry is a little bit hard to understand. People say, I can't really get into poetry. I don't get it. Poetry is not monolithic. Like there's so many
Yeah.
kinds of poetry. My poetry specifically is not me following some kind of formula, or it's not a craft that I developed. It really is just my own unique way of doing this. The poems aren't all the same, but they're all very clear. That's not, I have to figure out what she means here. I say what I
Yeah.
mean. And sometimes it's even, I took a paragraph and I put it in the form of a poem, left out some words, put some
Sure.
things. It's not rocket science, and anyone could actually do it. If you've posted anything on social media, you could write poems like I do.
Right.
Now, I will say I am proud of several of them. There are lots of things that went into that. And it's not like I just plopped it on the page and there it
Sure.
was. But at some point, and I get asked this all the time, and I don't actually know what happened, but I decided less is more. I can pull some things out. I'm not going to try to tell the whole story. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. Something that took 10, 12 years to happen and unfold. I don't know how to put all of that in there. And so I'm going to say less. And
Yeah.
then other people can fill in the blanks, and I don't have to worry about covering all the bases. And it kind of went along with my whole freedom from having to prove what I believed, because that was
Yeah.
always the thing where someone would say something and I would need an airtight argument. I would need all of this
Sure.
like cross referencing. I would need proofs. I would need this and that. And I thought, I'm going to let that go. I'm going to put something out in the world. The word heretic is on the front cover. So no
Yeah.
one can come to me and be like, you're a heretic. Well, I know that I am based on what I'm sure your definition of a heretic is. And it worked. And people like I'm floored by the people that come to me and say, you inspired me to write poems, or I wrote in the margins, or this poem is exactly my story but I switched some words out and now it's
That's cool.
exactly my story and I could do this, or this gives me hope or whatever. And so that's just kind of been the thing. And I've been asked, are you going to just keep writing poetry? Well, yeah, for the unforeseeable future. Like I want I'm going to do that because it's it's working for me. And it just really fits. Like it
Mm.
fits where I'm at, where I think other people are at. It's easy to just share a poem, and other people get to share them, and it doesn't tell my whole story, and I can elaborate on it more. I have a Substack where sometimes I'll share a poem and then kind of go into it a little bit more. But the things that I love are when people come to me and say, I love how you did this, this, and this with the poem. And it's something that I had no idea that
Yeah.
you would even see in the poem. So they think I'm smart. And I'm like, I didn't know that I did that, but that's great
Yeah.
that you saw that. And then it's
That's
really interactive and people get like engaged with it. And yeah, so there are a lot of different reasons why it
yeah.
turned into that. I do sometimes miss being able to just spit out 2,000 words in a row that go deep into how I feel about something, but I don't miss it enough to
Yeah.
to change
Well,
how I'm doing it.
and it also appears as if there's a different end goal, right? Like your end goal. I mean, it's easier. And I was a conservative evangelical, you could say fundamentalist, whatever. Like it's easier to write there because it's like I have the formula. Like this is the
Yep.
answer, and I
Mhm.
work
Yeah.
backwards from there. And it's like
Yeah.
I'm giving you this, and I love kind of what you're saying in this regard of the poetic nature of it, because what I have always found is everyone's deconstr there is no one size fits all cookie cutter
All right.
deconstruction journey,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that's one of the things, and I'm not like a deeply artistic or poetic person, but I found this idea of like being you can put yourself it's one of the reasons I like the Psalms is someone that's not very articulate or very
Mhm.
artistic. It's like I can put myself in these stories and I feel the emotions, and it's
Yeah.
quicker, and it's like hits faster. And what I appreciate about your perspective as it relates to not just your book but deconstruction is this idea that like I'm not going to give you all the answers. I'm not going to tell you my whole story, but I'm going to give you some of the
Yeah.
tools to maybe try to articulate where you are and how you're going through this and what all that is like. And I think it's a wonderful way to go about it because I know for Emily, if Emily was here with us today, like one of the things she would have said is that like this idea of deconstruction is like it's hard to wrestle with. Like she had every
Mhm.
answer in her
Mhm.
backpack. Like she could
Yeah.
pull it out. And the biggest and hardest thing for her to surrender was certainty, right? And
Mhm.
the one
Yeah.
size fits all, right? The brand
Yeah.
of Christianity she was sold was you don't need anything else. Like the
Yeah.
Methodists down the road, like your uncle are nuts, and the other people down the
Yeah.
road are nuts, and like we've got
Yep.
the only right formula. And I
Yeah.
think as weird as that sounds looking back for her, she was like, there was comfort in knowing that we were the right ones and
Mhm.
everyone else
Oh,
sucked and they were wrong.
yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
I like the way it seems as if you're going about this. It's like you're not trying to supply everyone the answers, but you're trying to give them some tools to try to find their own emotions and place within the story. Um, and so I wonder for you, like, so deconstruction, when Emily and I started this podcast, there was a point where she was like, I'm gonna be real Christian again at the other side of it.
Okay.
And we got to maybe episode 28, late 20s, early 30s, maybe. And we sat before we were recording. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but her and I were sitting down with our producer Dustin, and she's like, "Guys, like I don't know if I can record you. Like I don't think I'm Christian enough for this podcast."
Mm.
And our producer Dustin was like, "Well, Emily, just so you know, you were never Christian enough for this podcast." and, but like one of the things that I thought was interesting of what she was saying underneath what she was saying is like, is this space still safe for me? Like, how long is this
Mm.
going to take? And
Yeah.
do I still have a voice to be a part of this? And I wonder, just from you, for your perspective, like, you've been at this for a while, you're contributing content to the deconstruction movement, and you
Hmm.
seem pretty, I wouldn't say comfortable in like a negative way, but you seem okay with where you're at currently. But what
Hmm.
has that journey been like? Have you had those ups and downs where you're like, man, like, did I throw the baby out with the bathwater? Like, I need to go back to this, or am I Christian enough, or not Christian? Like, where have you just? I mean, it's kind of an amorphous question, but where has your emotional journey been throughout this? Because I know that it can really be a roller coaster of emotions, of feeling like you're not a part of the collective you once knew, and you've
Yeah.
surrendered your beliefs, like even even accepting the term heretic, which I
Yeah. Yeah.
also sometimes claim with great joy.
Yeah.
But like, that's an interesting part of the journey too, to be like, I'm okay for people to call me that. Doesn't hurt my feelings anymore, right? But I'm going to
Hmm.
claim it. So what has that journey of kind of deconstruction over this whole process been like for you?
It has been, yeah, a lot of ups, a lot of downs. It was rough. The hardest part, I think, was my sister disowning me when we were such good friends, and then she refused to see me when we came back to visit the States. So I saw her in 2016, and then this all happened around 2017. We came back to visit in 2018, and she and her husband would not see me. So I haven't seen her since 2016.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so that was probably personally the hardest thing. My parents and I have had some rough patches. They don't quite understand why I would forsake all the things that I grew up knowing, and they've
Sure.
tried to understand some different things. My dad will try to listen to um, podcasts or things that he thinks that I might
Okay.
that might build a bridge, but he also thinks that Fox News is like middle ground.
Sure.
So I'm like, yeah, okay. So that has been tough. What I do tell people, I have a lot of people come to me because they say, I don't know anybody else who's going through this or in my
Yeah.
personal life. I can't I cannot fathom that because I have met hundreds of people. Like
Yeah. Yeah. I
everybody
get it.
I know has, so I'm never alone. Even if I'm alone in my home or my town, I'm not alone in the wider world. And so I do tell people I cheated a little bit on this deconstruction journey because I moved across the world in 2015. So in 2015, I'm on the other side of the world and I'm doing all of this from far away. So I'm not in a church that I had to leave or stand up and like fight
Sure.
against people about things. I'm not going into Target or Walmart and running into people that disowned me. Like I am on the other side of the world. When Trump got elected and all that happened, I was on the other side of the world. So
Yeah.
I was able to do it kind of from a safe distance. Of course, that also got me into trouble because people are only now seeing what I post on the internet and they're forgetting what it's like to be in a living room with me, like my sister in particular,
Yeah.
and sit down and chat face to face. They're forgetting that this is still the same Marla that they love, who they think is kind and loving and loves their kids. They're only seeing Facebook Marla, which doesn't come across quite the same way. So
I
so
get that
that was
tension.
tough. Um, right now, currently, it literally am just in this free space of love. Like I just love everybody. And I have friends who are still Christians. I have friends who are pastors. Um, I was just talking to a pastor friend the other day and they said like I see God in you. Like my friends will apologize when they say things about God to me because they know I'm not really besties with God right now. But the bottom line is we have something in common and that is love. Like we we love each other. We are invested in each other. We want each other to thrive and be whole. And when you can just be in a relationship with someone like that and you are not concerned with what their theological beliefs are, you're only concerned with do you do you love me? Do you care about me? Do you want me to thrive? Do you want all of humanity to thrive like I do? Then we can be friends. Like we can be in this together. and so much that I missed out on by thinking that people were either worthy of being in a relationship with me because they believe the same things, or they're on the outside and they were a project for me to convert to Christianity,
Mm,
to win to the Lord. And now I can just be on equal footing with everyone, and all the new friends that I've made from, like I said, all different walks of life, whether they're atheist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, any faith or no faith, it doesn't matter to me anymore. And I have no concern with their eternal soul. Like, if I don't say these words to them, they're going to go to hell and it's going to be my fault. That's off the table. And so it's just super freeing. And I make a lot of comparisons in both of my books, between my divorce and my deconstruction. They didn't really necessarily have a whole lot to do with each other.
sure.
They didn't cause each other or whatever. Um, but I talk about how when my ex-husband first left and people would say to me, like, "You're gonna be so much better off without him. Like, you're gonna it's gonna be so whatever." And I get that sentiment, I do, but it was so much pain,
Yeah.
like, over the last 2.5 years for me to get to where I now am, where I don't just start crying very often,
Yeah.
or I don't feel that deep pain. And the same thing with evangelical Christianity. On the other side of it, yes, there's beauty and freedom, but do you know the hell that I went through to
Yeah.
get to this spot? And that's what I want people to see. That's why I don't just flit off in the sunset and say, "Wee, I'm a bird. Look, I'm free." I go back and show people through my books, through things that I say on social media, that yes, this is really, really hard. Yes, you're going through something really shitty right now. Yes. And
Yeah.
then yes, there is freedom and joy on the other side of it. And it's not really this line, this spectrum. It's not point A to point B to point C.
Right.
Um, it's a mess. But generally speaking, I am on the other side of it. I also talk about how my ex and evangelical Christianity both wanted me to be less than, smaller than. They wanted to push me down. They didn't like who I was when I was my full self. And so I now get to be more me. I get to be who I really am, who I was meant to be, created to be, on
Yeah.
the other side of a a husband who put me down, and evangelical Christianity that tried to crush me as well just because I was a woman.
Mm,
So yeah, lots of parallels, but I'm in a really, really good spot. That's what I want for people. I want them to have the burden off their chest, off their shoulders. I want them to feel freedom, but not just freedom themselves. I want them to want freedom for everybody. I want
yeah.
them to want everybody to thrive. I want I want everybody to be celebrated for who they actually are, who they are inside, who they want to be. And I think of my queer friends especially, who their whole lives, if they grew up in the church or even if they didn't, they were they had to deny a very core part of them and squash it down and say that it was evil and say that it was bad and try to get rid of it. And the freedom that takes a long time to get out from under
Yeah.
that,
To unlearn that. Yeah.
like internalized homophobia, transphobia. And so the rest of my life, and I hope I get a lot more life. I'm 47 right now. I'd love to see it 100. I just am dedicating that to loving my neighbor as I love myself. And the love God part can also be in that. I don't really know who God is to me. But I think back in the day when I did know, I didn't really know because I don't think that God exists. I think
Yeah.
that God was a figment of my imagination as well. So yeah, loving God, loving my neighbor,
Yeah.
loving myself is plenty enough to keep me busy.
Yeah. Well, I think that last thing you said, I mean, all of what you said was really wonderful, but I resonated with the last part of uh, like I'm not like I'm good with loving neighbor, and I'm interested in maybe loving God, but the God I was told to love, like was yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but like not the real God, like a figment of
Yeah,
my imagination, right?
yeah,
And I
mhm.
think what's interesting, like I'm very similar. Like my divorce parallels my divorce and deconstruction are in no way connected, but I draw
Mhm.
parallels. And one of the things
Yeah.
I've been recently reflecting on is like my ex-wife is not all women, right? And the God I was told about is not, I believe, the real God of the scripture,
Yeah.
right? And I think
Mhm.
that was an interesting turning point for me to be like, um, because I had this traumatic and terrible thing happen in my marital life. Like it wasn't like I was throwing out every potential for a relationship again. And I'm married and we have uh, a bonus child. So we had all this wonderful stuff going on. So like,
Mhm.
and I would have not imagined that to happen for how traumatic that was. And I think that's one
Yeah.
of the things Emily and I have talked a little about too, is like the God that she was told about, that's like shitty and traumatic, right? That's like hard
Mhm.
to reconcile. And like
Yeah.
you cannot give someone a timeline to get over it. But one of
Yeah.
my encouragements to her, and it sounds like you're saying a similar thing, is like one thing we can all agree on, whether we all make it back to the God of the Bible, is that the God that you were told about, Emily, yourself, myself growing up, this kind of fundamentalist, really exclusionary God, is
Mhm.
really not the God of the Bible,
Yeah.
and really not the God at the core of what early Christians believed, and
Yeah.
what I think is the core of Christianity. I think that's an interesting thing to wrestle with, is like where do we pull in something to learn from our past trauma, but also cast vision for where we're going, but also not rush people through it. Because I mean, with sharing divorce in part of our stories, I bet you had as many people as I did, like, uh, just get over it or get on the other side, or
Yeah.
like I remember people trying to set me up on dates before like the papers dried on my divorce. I was like, let me be divorced
Mm.
for a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's
Yeah.
like I think in faith people do that too. They try to rush us through this, and there is so much healing that happens just in like the pausing and the waiting, um, and the reflecting in all of that, not just in divorce, but in our faith life as well. So um,
Yeah, when you said that about, like, not all women, not all like, not God, I feel that same way about, and I have no interest right now in dating. I'm just loving, like, getting to know myself and to be by myself,
yeah,
and the kind of my philosophy, I think, behind that is I am gonna work on being this whole, complete, wonderful person that maybe someday would attract another whole, complete, wonderful person,
yeah,
but if he doesn't come along, that's fine because I'm cool with with my
yeah.
own
You're
whole
whole and
wonderful
complete now,
stuff.
right?
Yeah. But when about men, I had put on Instagram a few weeks ago that there will be times I've had some back and neck problems, so I stretch every morning and every evening, and that has really helped me a lot. And I do it on a yoga
Yeah.
mat. And there's every once in a while, I will just start crying on the yoga mat. And I don't actually know why. And this the most recent time it was that a man in my life had said something kind to me, and I realized that when men in my life are kind to me, I am shocked and surprised because my
Mm,
ex-husband was unkind to me, and that's
mm.
kind of what I learned to expect, and then it made me sad that I feel surprised when men are kind to
Yeah,
me, and I wish that I wasn't, and so I was just experiencing this, and I shared it, and it was just resonated with so many people, and I had
yeah.
men coming to me and saying that they were so like that just made them sad that that was like that, and they understood, and they wished that more men would spend time on their yoga mats. And it was just it was a really healing thing for me
Yeah.
to and that is something that has come into my life lately. Male friends or my brother-in-law, my brother, my dad, these kind men who say kind things to me, are loving to me, are helpful, they respect me. And so I'm careful. It's not all men. Like it's not, and it's not all
Yeah.
white men. I also I speak to that
Yeah.
in Jaded some about white men getting a bad rap for a very, very, very good reason. But I have since met some good white men who are doing their best to not be like all the other
Beautiful.
white men. um, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cool kind of thing. And I'm learning, like I said, my Christian friends, my pastor friends, we talk about God, and I'm realizing, oh, you are describing a very different God
Sure.
than I know. I could actually get behind that God. That my problem is using the word God I associate God with this
Yeah, it
certain
stirs
God,
up
and
so much other
so
stuff,
yeah,
right?
so do so many people who are listening to me. So what am I to do with that? If I
Mm,
were to say, guess what? I have this really cool new relationship with God, and they're like, whoa, hold up, we thought you didn't like him. I'm like, well, it's not him. It's
yeah,
it's somebody different. So yeah, so
that's
that's kind of what I'm working through. How do I describe where I am and what I feel and what I think, using the same kind of language
yeah.
that means something else entirely to most
Mm,
people. So I don't know. I'm still
yeah.
working on that.
Language and I language makes it so interesting. Your yoga mat story is really interesting because it's like you could get 100 people on a yoga mat, right? And they wouldn't have that
Mhm.
experience, but it's like it
Mm,
has this kind of visceral thing for you, and I think
yeah.
naming or that experience in singular did and so it's like there is this interesting like we and this is what I like about your book is like we can't get in everyone else's heads, and so being in our
Mhm.
own helps us process to become these whole complete versions of ourselves. And I actually do,
Yeah.
at a very deep level, believe as we do that for ourselves. Like if the light of Christ is in me, as I let that light shine brighter, it helps other people do the same, right? And so as I become more
Yeah.
whole and healthy,
Mhm.
it's actually allowing other people, not because my light's so much brighter, but like they're starting to see like, oh, I can actually be really me, right? I can be the
Yeah.
person I was created to be. So, so we could talk. We've gone for about 45 minutes. I feel like I could talk to you for 3 hours. You're very easy to talk to. But before I want to kind of wrap us up, and so
Yeah.
I think we've dipped into your stuff, but just kind of share like what some of the work you've done, where people can find it, and where people can find you. Because I think our listeners, one of the things they enjoy about episodes like this is it opens their eyes to a new set of content and resources they can find.
Yeah.
So, like whether it's your writing, your blogging, your social media, like just tell people what you're doing and where they can find you.
Yeah, I hang out most of the time on Instagram and Twitter, and that's at Marla Taviano on both places. And then I also have at White Girl Learning on Instagram, which is where I
Okay.
read and review all of those books. And that has been it's a really cool space where people just can learn and grow and share together. And I do have a website, marlataviano.com, that I need to update some things there. You can find Unbelieve and Jaded there. My publisher is Lake Drive Books, so lakedrivebooks.com has a way that you can buy Jaded. And then my Substack is marlataviano.substack.com, and that is I know people are getting inundated by Substack newsletters right now, so I've tried to keep mine just like my books. I keep
I
it
actually
short
don't
and
even know
sweet.
what is Substack. I've never heard of it before.
Oh, okay. Well, look it up. Become a free subscriber to my Substack after we
Yeah,
shut
I'm
this
gonna
down.
check it out.
It's kind of the new blogging platform. It's a newsletter. Like I have
Okay.
a paid part. My free part is a poem every Thursday. So just Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. there will be a new poem, or it might be a poem from my book, and then I share a little bit of backstory. But that I
Okay.
keep it
Cool.
short and sweet because I know that people don't have time to read 1,000 words from everybody. And then the paid part, like I pay to read a lot of my friends, particularly Black and Brown friends, to read their Substack. It's like $5 a month. So it's kind of my, instead of giving my tithes to a church, I give these
Yeah.
micro reparations to my friends. And then I have a paid portion of mine too that's $5 a month. And it's actually called Writing Whole Farted, which is a whole different thing. But it's a writing community because
Okay.
people ask me pretty much every day, how do you get a book published? What advice do you have for me for writing and all of this? And I tell them, as a nice person, I'd love to give you advice. I do not have the time. I am a single mom. I work full time. I'm trying to write books. I'm reading 250 books a year. But if you join this writing community, you will have access to my mind. You can ask me questions. There's like 25 people in the community right
Cool.
now. They're all writers, aspiring writers. They do guest posts. It's a lot of fun. So Substack, definitely check out Substack, not just mine, but all the other
I'll
ones.
have to
And then,
check it out.
so yeah, so Unbelieve, I recommend. Jaded, I recommend. Any books that you see with the name Marla Taviano on them that are not those two books, do not read them because they are the old Marla Taviano. And then there will be a third book. It's going to be a trilogy that will be coming out
Okay.
probably the beginning of 2024. I'm not sure yet. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I'm
Well,
at. And
maybe
I love meeting new people. So
yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun. Maybe Emily and I we'll do a book review of your first book and on the podcast.
Yeah, that would be yeah, I'm sad that I didn't get to meet Emily. Tell her that I
Yeah.
said hi,
Well, I'll
and
tell you
yeah.
that, and this isn't self-deprecating humor, though that is one of my love languages. Emily is exponentially smarter and more fun than I am, so she's the backbone of this podcast. And so, and I will say, just as I don't gas her up enough, she's like truly one of the brightest theological minds. Even though she's not sure if any
Mm,
of what she was sold she believes in anymore, but if there's
yeah.
someone that's gonna like tell you what they believe and be able to find scriptural backing for it,
Mm,
she's your person. And what I've loved about her process of unlearning to kind of like build up a new bag of resources, because she's one of the sharpest minds out there. She's just been given a lot of
mm,
crappy tools, I feel like. And
yeah.
so it's like now she's getting some better tools to go about that journey.
She sounds like my kind of person. So what you actually need to do is that Emily and I need to have a book club about my
I
first
think that's
book,
probably true.
not you.
Yeah, there actually was a part of me that was like, maybe I should have Emily do this episode. But
Oh.
Emily's had a fever this week, and so
Oh,
I'm trying to
yeah.
cover as much as I can this week. So
Okay, well,
um,
let me know what you decide.
yeah, well, we'll loop you back in.
Yeah.
Well, Marla, I really appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun. We usually end with
A
a
prayer? No,
similar.
I'm just kidding.
Uh, that's what every guest says that when I get there. We kind of end with the same sign off, but before we end, I just want to quickly, for anyone listening, this is coming out. I'm terrible with dates, but in a week or so from when we're recording this. But a week from when this comes out, Emily and I are going to Mount Union University in Ohio to do a live podcast recording with their One Voice
Oh.
series out there. So anyone in the West Ohio or East Ohio region, rather, Alliance, Ohio, come out and join us. We'd love to have you there, Marla. If you want to make a trip back up there, come join us.
I do not, but thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have stand up comedy. Dustin
Wow.
and Emily are both stand up comedians as well, and so they're gonna do a
Oh,
little
cool.
comedy. We're gonna talk a little about deconstruction, then we're gonna do a live podcast. First time we've ever done it, so we're excited.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
we're
Very
excited
fun.
about that. So,
Cool.
but friends, thank you for joining us, and don't forget to embrace the journey. And we'll see you later.